Happy that you could find the time to do this. What should I call it? Like a video interview or a podcast? Like it seems like nowadays everybody has
Yeah.
a podcast. But
Yeah, that's right.
it's really nice that you could take the time. And we are like on the other side of the world. You're in the US. I'm in Norway. That's pretty far, and we were able to do something like this. So I want to start with you. Who are you, Chris? Like what was your? I know that right now you're running a company called Anchor.dev. How did you get there? What is your journey?
Yeah, great. So first, just thanks for having me on, Ali. Like since we met, it's been great. Like just getting to know you, and so happy to jump on here and connect and talk through everything. So yeah, who I am. My name is Chris Stolt. I've been working in the software engineering, industry now for over 20 years. Spent a lot of that time at Heroku and Salesforce, building out one of the largest developer platforms. Was super early employee there. And then recently I started Anchor.
So you said you've been working in the engineering or IT world for 20 years. How did you get started in this?
Yeah.
So like, did you start at like Salesforce or Heroku and then you stayed there for like 20 years, or was that?
No, it's like the reason I kind of chuckled when you asked that, how did I get started? So I have this passion. It's like we'll go all the way back. I have this passion for physics. Like, it's a thing that I almost like these days I say would like study on the side as like a hobby. I took physics in high school. So when I went to college, I was studying physics. And when I got there, when I was first going there and I was selecting my classes, my dad's like, "Hey, you need to take a computer class." And I was like, "I don't know. Like, I'm going to college. I'm paying for it. Like, I'm going to do what I want." He's like, "Yeah, but I'm helping you a little bit with like some room and board or something." I mostly paid for it, but they did help out a bit, the parents. And so he's like, "I just asked, just take a computer class. It'll be good for you." And I also fell in love with programming as I started to learn it. So eventually I just kind of looked at the stuff and I was like, I don't know what I would do with a physics degree. I don't know what kind of jobs to get. It turns out that there probably would have been plenty, but
Yeah.
it was also, this was in 98 is when I first started going to college.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, but if I do computer science, I can get like whatever job I want. Like, this industry is like booming, right? So I switched over to computer science. Then I graduated in 2001. About a year prior, the dot-com bubble had burst. So I get out of college with this degree in computer science, and I was like, I'm ready to go, and there's no jobs, especially for somebody with no experience.
Yeah.
So I was like, what kind of mistake did I make? And so I just kind of did some random things for about a year or so. And then the industry started to recover, right? The web industry started coming back. We started to build the early inklings of Web 2.0 with all the like cloud stuff, and that's when I like was able to get back into things. I'd started at GE, General Electric, doing a bunch of different things, but primarily focused on ops, computer operations, right? System ops and infrastructure stuff. And from there, I moved over to this kind of precursor almost to Heroku, although they were sort of starting around the same time, called Engine Yard.
So just you talked about Heroku. I've used Heroku before, but for the ones that don't know what Heroku is, what is Heroku?
Oh yeah, so Heroku is a web development platform for deploying and running web apps. So if you write a web app in pretty much any open source language, you can use git push to deploy it to Heroku. And if you've ever, regardless of where you're deploying your code, you've probably deployed using git push. You can do that to all sorts of platforms now. Heroku invented that. And Heroku also invented this thing called build packs, which allows you to kind of layer in the bits that you need. And build packs were sort of like a precursor and in some kind of hand wavy ways, like a impetus for Docker to be created by people that weren't Heroku, sort of like a little weird competition coming out of that space. So early days, back in the day, it was like hard to deploy code.
Right.
And
it's
Heroku
still
came on the scene
is.
and was like, we'll just use Git and Git push to deploy code. And then, the whole containerization phase and thing that really took off was sort of started right around the same time. And that's really how containers were like, it wasn't Docker, it was prior to that, but containers were really the way that Heroku was able to do what they did and allow people to get pushed to do deployments. So actually, before Heroku, I was at this company, Engineer, and that's where I like started really learning how to deploy code and dial that in, which led me into Heroku. And then After 10 years at Heroku, so early on with Heroku, we got acquired by Salesforce. A majority of the time that I was working for Heroku, we were part of Salesforce. A lot of folks don't realize how early Heroku got acquired and how long they've really been part of Salesforce. It was a really great company to work for, which was surprising to me because I didn't think I wanted to work in a big tech company again, but then it totally worked. There's a lot of reasons that place is great. About, like after 10 years, I was like ready for a change.
Yeah.
It was peak pandemic. Personally, like a little personal anecdote, my mother had cancer at the time. She had multiple myelomas. Yeah, thanks. So I was like having to focus like time with her. I have a kid and schools weren't in session. So it was like, there's all these personal distractions in my life, and I was like, I need to step back and just take some time here to address some of these things. So I felt it was time to do something new and just kind of step away for a minute. So I did that. And during that time, my business partner, Ben, well, he was also not working for his own personal reasons at the time, but we go way back. We were working back at that Engine Nerd company originally together, and then we spent time at Heroku together as well. So we go way back, really old, really close friend of mine, and we're like, hey, we want to kind of work together, specifically work together on something, possibly start something. So we're just sort of like getting into it, like trying to figure out, like, messing around a little bit, kind of doing a pandemic hack project that became Anchor. So he kind of was like, well, I have this idea of like cert management is totally hosed. Certificates expiring in people's infrastructure are still causing outages. And I was like, oh, that totally resonates with me. Like, working in support, like we have to go explain this stuff to customers. It's taking down our infrastructure. Myself and my team are getting paged in to go deal with these outages and stuff. So I was like, yeah, let's go tackle this problem. So we started working on it, and that's really how we started Anchor.
And how many years was this ago?
That was about, we probably did our first commit and first started like talking about it about 3 years ago.
Wow, cool.
But it was like really slow at first. We're just like, hey, we have some ideas, and we'd, I don't know, once or twice a week show up and work on something, or we'd have like an idea and we'd kind of spike it out. So it was a really slow start. We weren't even necessarily immediately focused on like, let's just go start this business right away with this idea.
Yeah.
It was like, let's start with this hack project and work together on something. And it sort of bubbled up from there. And as we started to be like, hey, this thing feels like it's got legs and some traction here, that's when probably about 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago rather, we were like, hey, let's like make a business and like go for it.
Cool. And you said, I got curious because you said your first commit was like 3 years ago or something. How many commits do you have right now?
Oh, that is awesome that you asked, because one of my coworkers just posted in Slack what number of commits we were at yesterday, and it is just over 2,500 commits.
2,500. Wow. Then you're like production ready, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we launched the lcl.host product, the one that you and your co-founder picked up in March. So been a long kind of meandering journey to get to the point where we were like, hey, this is the thing that we really need to focus on. This is the market entry point, and a lot of hard work to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I really like how simple you guys made it. Maybe for the people that don't know lcl.host, maybe we could just like jump into the website and just, you could speak briefly about what it is and what this product solves. What do you think about that?
Yeah, totally. That sounds awesome. So maybe like just teasing it in a little bit. So Anchor, like the company, and like Anchor, the like kind of overarching product. What Anchor is a application encryption platform that's really focused on fixing certificate management. Certificates are the thing that underpin application encryption, which is HTTPS, TLS, SSL, that type of stuff. And so like what we did with Anchor to really make it work is early on, we just, and the reason we only launched lcl.host in March, and we've been working on it for so long, is we were really just focused on, hey, that underlying tech here, the underlying standards is X509. It's an open standard. It's been around since the 80s. We're like, we need to rebuild this from the ground up to like be able to provide a stellar developer experience on top of it. And we knew we could do that, but we needed to like give ourselves like the components that allowed that to happen. So we really had to spend a lot of time. And this is like, you might have asked about like some of the challenges of getting going. It was like, it's hard tech, right? Like it's deep, hard tech. So like just spending that time getting those components, those low level primitives in place so we could provide a good developer experience. And then that's what allowed us to create lcl.host, which is a developer tool. It's free for everybody to use. You can check it out at lcl.host.com.
lcl.host, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
lcl.host. And yeah, just once the CLI is installed, it's just a single command to get up and running with local encryption. And when you do that, if you want to eventually go all the way and bring Anchor into production inside of your company, you have a clear path from there to doing that. But if you're like, hey, we just need to use this in my dev environment for now, that's totally cool. And yeah, it's free for everybody to use.
I mean, I can vouch for you guys. I mean, so far we've been using it for a few months, and we really like the dev experience. I mean, we're not experts on encryption, so whenever there's like encryption, I'm like, I just use HTTP, and then I found you guys through some video on YouTube. And then the setup was like, it literally took like 30 seconds. So I was really impressed. And then from there, we connected and been using your product ever since, man. I mean, great work.
Thanks, we appreciate that.
So Chris, about Anchor, where did that name come from? Is there any story behind it, or is just
There is kind of. So it's kind of a double entendre, I suppose. So we talked about what Anchor is with lcl.host. It's encryption. The way encryption works is you have this root of trust, like this kind of thing at the root, at the core, at the end that's trusted by something in your system. And as long as you have a chain that your clients and the other things can follow back to that root of trust, then you can trust this thing. And if you follow that chain to the end, what's at the end of it? Chains, a lot of times, it's an anchor, right? Like, so you're like anchoring in that root of trust at the end of the chain. And that's also a common way to refer to the root of the trust as the anchor certificate. So there's that. But in addition to that, so Ben and I, when we first were living in San Francisco, we were roommates and we were living up in Potrero Hill. There's a brewery in Potrero Hill called Anchor Brewery. And we used to be able to smell it, like when they make this stuff called steam beer. And when they were brewing the steam beer, we could like smell it. And we were like, oh, they're making steam beer. Like you could smell the wort that they were making. And it was kind of cool. It's a little bit of a, nod to like where we like kind of met, and like we're like a big portion of our careers were kind of kicking off in San Francisco at the time. In addition to that, this like weird little anecdote kind of happened where right as we were starting Anchor, the brewery closed down, and we were like, oh no, like this is like crushing us. Like we love that place, but like they closed down. I think somebody finally bought them, but it was both very specific, like this, hey, this has to do with like this technology, but also like the school thing from like the neighborhood where we like kind of met and like we're spending a bunch of time.
Man, awesome. That's a really good name. And I mean, I like it. It's simple. It's it Anchor. I like the name starts with an A as well. I mean, I find that type of names like powerful. It's a nice name. It's easy to remember. And I found out that your company, LCL Host, I couldn't kind of remember that easily, but then on the first meeting you were talking a lot about Anchor, and that kind of like stuck in my brain. At least it's a good name, and hopefully the company grows that name, and your brand and authority is just gonna explode in the future, man. Talking about like this product LCL Host, and it took you like quite a while to get to figure out that the market entry is this is what people need right now, and then from there you guys are going to be scaling up, I'm guessing, to more products. What was the biggest challenges when you mentioned it briefly, in order to make LCL Host available to people? What were some of the challenges, the biggest ones you've had?
Yeah, so I'd say probably the initial first really big challenge, and what's cool is like we kind of like have skirted these challenges in this conversation already, but like the first big one is X509 has been around since like the 80s, and it's really, really difficult to use. So just like taking this thing that is pretty archaic in terms of the user experience and it's arcane, and wrangling that to be able to provide a really good developer experience on top of it was pretty challenging, both technically and from a design and user experience standpoint. So that's really where we started. And that was some of the big technical challenges. The other thing is, this is security, right? Like people don't like to think about security all that much. It's not the cool, big, hot, new, sexy thing. Like AI is on the market now. Everybody's like focused on what can I do with AI? What can AI do for me? All that type of stuff. And when you start talking about security, people are like, can you give me a pillow? Like, I don't care about this. But it's needed, right? It's necessary. So it's like this weird thing that's just there and it's necessary. So it's also challenging finding a way to like talk to people and get them excited about this stuff.
Yeah. Since you talked about security, I'm just wondering about something that recently happened the last few weeks. There's this company called CrowdStrike that you kind of crashed half of the world or something. What do you think about
Right.
that?
Yeah. So my understanding of CrowdStrike, and there's certainly much better experts on the stuff out there, but my understanding of CrowdStrike is what happened is they have an agent that runs on their customers' computers and their servers as well, and that agent really plugs into the kernel of the operating system.
Yeah.
And then it manipulates things, and it's meant to give their customers some extra security, monitoring malware and things of this nature. And they pushed out a bug, and that took everything down. And so when we think about security, we really think about it in terms of the zero trust model. And zero trust, another way of putting that is really multi-layered security. You need security at all these different layers of the stack. And we would typically try to avoid the products that are going to manipulate the kernel of the operating system. There's reasons why people do that. There's reasons why people don't. For us, we're like, hey, we think that the operating system vendors are the best at knowing what should be going on in their kernel. And so we want to avoid those kind of hooks that go that deep. And instead, we're really focused on saying like, hey, as app developers, should want to, whether or not you do, like you should want to own your security. So then you can take your app, run it on any infrastructure, regardless of whether that infrastructure itself is secure or not. You don't really have to worry about like what's going on those computers. So that's where we come in with the TLS and encryption. And so anytime your application puts data in flight, you can make sure that that data is encrypted.
And just out of curiosity, I mean, we're talking about Windows computers and then Linux and Mac. And so was it a challenge for you guys to be supporting, so much diversity in terms of computers?
Yeah, so great question. I wouldn't say it was a challenge. It was a bunch of work, but it was more like, hey, we just have to do this work. We are lucky enough to have experience across. So there's kind of two angles to it. It's like we have support for Linux, Mac, and Windows, right?
Right.
So there's the kind of the three big like main operating systems out there that we can support. So we had to do some work for that. Luckily, especially with Linux and Mac, they're pretty similar, and we have experience like developing against those systems. So it was the work to do it, but not so challenging in terms of like, oh, we're up against something new. Windows is a little bit more challenging just from an experience standpoint. Then the team that we've assembled is like pretty experienced across a multitude of languages. So we support right now Ruby, we support JavaScript, including Next and Node, and we support Python, and we support Go. Across our team, we have like experience across all those languages. So again, it was more about like focusing and getting the work done and like spending the time to get the work done, more so than these big technical challenges of like, oh, I have to go out and like learn a new language first or something like that.
Yeah, and what is your thoughts about Rust?
I've played with it a little bit. It seems fun. I learned Go earlier than Rust, so I kind of gravitate more toward that language. We have more Go expertise on the team, so they're both, I don't know, similar in a sense of in terms of like being like a little bit lower level languages, since like JavaScript and Ruby you tend to kind of use for like doing programming further up the stack. I don't know, Rust seems great, and it's cool to see it out there and people using it.
Do you guys have plans to support it in the near future, like security wise, encryption?
Yeah, so I think if we get a demand for it, it would be cool to support it. We really started with, web applications. So we were like, hey, what are the big languages that web apps are written in? We're talking about web apps, and you'll notice that I didn't mention PHP, which is still probably the most widely deployed language for web programming, and Java for that matter. Not JavaScript. We support JavaScript, but those two really come down to where we're trying to enter the market at the moment, right? Which is doing a developer-led kind of bottoms-up growth approach. And so when it comes to like PHP and Java, we tend to see those languages more in like the enterprise. So they're on a roadmap. We want to get to them, and it would be really cool to support all languages, Rust and some of the more esoteric languages. We will get there when the demand starts to come in for some of those other languages.
I have a question about, because when you're talking about so many languages, I mean, your team must be either really small and really good, or you have a huge team, because, the amount of support you need to provide to each and every language and each and every framework. So it makes me curious about like how you guys secured your funding in the early stage. Like, how did that go? You have ambitions to, conquer the world and support all of those things, but you have only like 5 or 10 people. How did you guys go about that?
Yeah, so it's currently a team. We're currently a team of 5 that includes myself and my co-founder Ben. The way we approached funding was kind of funny and almost like by accident, I would say. So our lead investor is this firm called HeavyBit. They primarily invest in dev tools. HeavyBit was started by James, one of the co-founders of Heroku. And so since James launched that, I, especially myself, but like some of the other folks that we work with right now, we've had some kind of like a little bit of involvement with HeavyBit, either be through their advising program or, like the offices were down the street. At some point, we kind of like, we outgrew an office we were in, overflowed into the HeavyBit offices for like a short period of time and stuff. So it's been like, we've been kind of close with HeavyBit just as a firm since they've been around. And then also some like personal friends ended up working there. So we just kind of like contacted them early on and just were like, hey, we're interested in like what you, like we're working on this thing, not really looking for funding. We weren't thinking about it at that time. Trying to figure out like, just like get some feedback, right? And we're like, you guys know dev tools really well. So like, what do you think of this? Like, are we onto something? Do you have any guidance? And what was interesting is they gave us the feedback that we're looking for, but also that kind of forced the question of like, should we bootstrap or should we fund? And being a security product, and really, I think the biggest part of the market's like further up in like bigger companies and really in the enterprise, we're like, I think taking on funding is going to be the right approach here. So that really kicked off the conversation generally about funding. So we started, amongst other people, working with HeavyBit to like start to secure that funding. But that's where like really how it started. And once we got our initial kind of term sheet rolling, everything else fell in place. So we were able to bring on HeavyBit. We were able to bring on another firm. It's a really small one called Irregular Expressions. It's ran by this guy named John Cini. He's awesome. As soon as we met him and we were like talking through like things, he was just like,
there was chemistry
riffing. Yeah, it was just like he was immediately like riffing on all this cool stuff that was like, oh, this feels really good. Like, you're somebody we want involved. So if you're starting a dev tools company, like check them out too. And then this other company started by a gentleman by the name of Maynard Webb. He's done a ton of things. He knows everybody. Like, he knows all the business leaders. It's wild. He started a firm called WIN. It's Web Investment Network. And they've been a really great resource and partner too. And actually, like, he wrote a book that he gave everybody. That was one of my favorite books, like when starting out, just like reading, called Dear Founder. And it's just this series of letters that he wrote. He writes them as if he's like writing a letter to a founder about a specific topic, and there's got to be so many letters in there, and like it's good because it really spans the entirety of like the startup thing. From like, hey, I'm thinking about starting a company. He's like, here's a letter about like things to think about and consider before you actually jump in and do it, and all the way up through like all the challenges, fundraising, scaling the company, bringing on employees, like recruiting, all the way up to like, hey, you're like hitting real scale now. Like, how do you build this up in leadership? Like, it's really great. I think it's a great resource there.
And I'm gonna put that book on the screen. I haven't read it myself, but it sounds like spot on for all founders and business people. It's it's a part of the challenge, and there's probably like millions of books written about this, like thousands or hundreds of thousands. But it's like always when it's coming from someone that has experience, it's a bit, you can relate to it more, especially if you know that person. So that's really cool, man. I mean, you have a nice journey leading up to that. And it makes me kind of wonder about what is next for you guys. Like, where do you see yourself in like 1 year from now in Anchor.dev?
Yeah. So what's next for us? Since we launched lcl.host, it's got some traction. When we get it in front of developers, like, you kind of sung its praises, but that's also what we hear from other folks. So when we get that tool in front of developers, they really like it, they adopt it, and they're looking for like to take it to the next step, right? So it's like, hey, I'm working with a team or like collaboratively with other people on this or inside of a company. So we just recently released a Teams feature around for lcl.host for Teams, and you can like bring it into like onto your team and your organization and your company. Yeah, a year from now, hopefully like where we want to be is LCL host is out there. We're continuing to see adoption. We're driving even more adoption of that product itself. People are moving on adopting teams, also a free feature, and then starting to move it into production. So we're really layering in those production features, which is kind of where we started originally. So like a lot of that work is done already, and the groundwork and the kind of primitives, so to speak, are in place for it. But we really just need to bring it into the LCL host flow. So you have that kind of smooth experience. LCL host, as you said, ran a single command, 30 seconds, everything's set up on your machine, setting up teams. It's another command or two. Now everybody on your team, when you have somebody new join, they can just like get up and going real quick with the same experience. And then moving on to like rolling things into production, we want that to be as smooth and natural feeling as an extension of the next step. So we're really focused on, honing in that user and developer experience. And that's where we hope to be, is like having people deploying into production.
So that's really interesting. I have to ask what that really means, like, because I'm just trying to relate to what we do when we deploy to production. So what do you mean by, do you mean like securing the production environment, or what do you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is securing the production environment. If your application is like a standalone single application, it's not calling out to APIs or any other services internally. And so your users are just kind of showing up, going to their browser, and then going to your website. You're not going to deploy anything with Anchor into production. Like your platform that you're deploying to is going to help you just kind of automatically get those publicly facing, customer facing certificates. As your kind of business and those apps scale, they almost certainly are going to end up needing different types of backing services. They're going to have to call out to like other internal APIs and services that you're going to be running, oftentimes behind the firewall, right? Like inside of your own network, and getting HTTPS running on those things inside your network behind the firewall is still really challenging. There's ways to do it. You can like plug up with Let's Encrypt, which is how the platforms are providing those free public facing certs. But there's a bunch of kind of things centered around that don't work really well even today. Like automatic renewals aren't a thing that's baked into the Acme protocol. Securing the keys properly. You don't really have like good visibility into what's being deployed where. So also, if you're using those public services, all the domain names that you're using have to be registered publicly. So you're a big kind of like SaaS type product, and behind the scenes you have like these different services and domain names that are running that like mapped onto your customers, right? Like customer name.thing.com. You suddenly have to expose all that publicly in order to get those certificates, and you might not want to be doing that because then you're kind of leaking some customer data inadvertently. So we can help you lock that stuff down, and
Cool.
that's where. And there's other features too, like across your entire environment, you might be looking for compliance and trying to go for compliance, especially if you're in a heavily regulated industry. And the compliance auditors, what they require is what they call evidence. So they have to, you have to like kind of prove to them like, hey, we're doing X, Y, and Z. And when it comes to TLS and SSL and HTTPS, and you want to show like, hey, we're encrypting all of our data that's in flight as well, that can be challenging. It can be a lot of work. And that's the type of production feature that we would put there and just say, hey, we're going to automatically ship this evidence up to these providers for you. So it's becomes push button integrations with those kind of providers.
Yeah, I mean that sounds really good. What do you think is the key? Because you mentioned a lot of like cool stuff and a lot of features, and like most founders, they probably like, if I ask you now what is the plan for the next 10 years, you give me something because you're thinking so much ahead and you have so many ideas. But what do you think the biggest impact, or like what is the thing that is going to make you guys prioritize what to work on next?
It's a combination of two things. One is primarily user feedback, right? Like what are people asking for? What are the users and the customers need? What do they want? Those are the first things that we want to go meet. And while doing that, just keeping an eye on kind of the user journey that I laid out. So like as a developer, like you reach for lcl host and get up and running with local HTTPS. There's a bunch of reasons why you want to do it. It could be dev prod parity. It could be that your payment gateway requires you to run HTTPS locally, even when you're developing, which I think was your case when you guys reached out and started using it. So from there, Teams features, so it's collaborative features that allow you to like really just like hit it with your team and just be like, hey, this is super smooth and sort of a thing that like we set up very easily and quickly once, and then like kind of don't need to think about it too much after that. And then, the next step in that user journey is like those production features. So just making sure like we're actually providing that stuff so that journey is smooth and makes sense and is natural. The specifics of that are really like based on like the feedback and input from users and customers.
So I'm wondering about one more thing. If like the people listening to this podcast and they want to reach out to you guys, what would be the best way to do that?
So there's two ways. You can hit us up at contact@Anchor.dev if you want to do email. We also have a Discord channel, which I can drop you a link on. You can like post it in the video.
Yeah, sure. And, I can add that.
Yeah, and there's like you can jump in the Discord channel and just talk to us. We have a Twitter or an X handle as well as LinkedIn. Really, just like wherever you find us and want to like reach out, we're going to be responsive. If you're using lcl host and you run into something, you can hit us up at contact or support. That's going to currently hits everybody in the company because we're all kind of doing support. But also the CLI is open source, so there's an open repo on our GitHub org. Drop an issue in there too if you want to. I think our CLI actually, if you run into an actual error, it just makes it like push button for you to be like, hey, I want to submit an issue, so we get that issue. We can go troubleshoot it and resolve it.
What that's interesting what you just said about like open sourcing. Why did you do that? Like in terms of, I'm guessing there are probably like competing products and such, but why did you guys decide to open source it?
For two reasons. One, I think that pretty much most software that you're going to install on your computer, you want it to be open source, like not 100% of the time. Maybe it's something, like coming from bigger companies, like a Zoom type application, but like if you're installing like CLI tools, you want them to be open source so you can really see what they're doing. The other aspect, and that's really important, and this kind of, I don't know, in some ways feeds back into the CrowdStrike question. We require, so in order to set up everything that lcl host sets up, one of the things that has to happen is we have to update for you to make this a thing that you don't have to do, your local trust stores, so that to trust the certificates that you're getting from Anchor. To do that, it requires sudo access. For those that are listening that aren't familiar with sudo, it's a command line argument that gives you like elevated privileges. So if we're going to ask people for sudo access, that's really like a deep trust thing. And there's like no better way to like, I think, earn that trust than to be like, we're going to show you all of the code so you can see, like, we're going to tell you what it does, but you can also go look at our code and see exactly what it does. And if there's something that you don't agree with, you can send us a pull request and like, we can like look at that and like probably incorporate that. But really, I think that, open sourcing parts of the platform, especially things where elevated privileges are concerned, you're installing things onto your machine are concerned, you want to like have that be open source, not just to get the extra eyeballs on it, but like I said, it drives that trust of like, hey, we're not doing anything weird here. We're not hooking into your kernel. Like you can just go look at the code and see exactly what it's doing. It's really just primarily calling out to like our APIs to like smooth out some of that user experience so that you don't directly have to do that.
And I'm wondering about what your thoughts about building in public. Like I hear from a lot of people that if you open source it, you're building in public, and that makes you, kind of more transparent. Do you find that? Do you agree with that?
Not just me, like our whole company is a big fans of open source. Like we kind of come from this open source background pedigree from the early days, like before it was nearly as popular as it is today. So our answer is like, yeah, totally. Like do a lot of things as open source. Some of your like kind of core, I think, business logic, perhaps maybe that's like a little bit more of the proprietary stuff, but like this is a CLI, like we're calling an API, like any engineer can like look at it and kind of like reverse engineer like a bit of what's going on there. So it's like, let's just open source this is the right thing to do from that standpoint. But building in public. So yeah, from the get-go, when you're doing open source, you are building in public. But I think the bigger thing with building in public, that from the people that I follow that are always talking about this and really doing it, is they're really putting out there everything about like building their company like in the public domain, right? They're posting it on whatever social channels they have about like, these are the things we're doing, these are the challenges we're meeting. And I think that's good. Like I love the transparency personally. We try and operate our company with as much transparency as possible. The one thing that I will say is this is probably more of we're not good at doing social things. We don't have like the person on the team that's good at that. So we probably post less about like what's going on than the people that are really like quote unquote building in public are doing. And it's not from a like lack of wanting to. It's just we're not good at it. And it's not natural for us. But like people show up with ask questions, like we're super happy to answer those and like have conversations like this and just be like transparent about that like whole journey, challenges, like what are we doing now, what's next, where are we going.
Yeah, and like that's kind of like what I would recommend people listening to this. I mean, I think for me, as also running a startup, the most fun thing for me is getting feedback from customers. And then them telling me like, usually if they say they like something, that's okay. But when they say I don't like something, I want that to be, that's even, more valuable.
Totally.
It pushes the product and it kind of allows you to reach where you want to reach.
Well, I totally 100% agree with that. That when customers tell you something, it feels good, right? Or they like something, it feels good. Just like, hey, I built this thing, and it feels good. Like, hey, maybe we hit it on the mark. But when somebody tells you that something's good, how do you like improve on that? You don't know. When you get the critical feedback, then you have like room to improve. You have room to like step back and think like, why were they critical? Why didn't they like it? What's the thing that was missing? You can take action against that. And so that's always good. And that's the feedback can be the most helpful. And sometimes if you really did hit the mark, the kudos.
Yeah. Of course, always. So some kudos is always good. And then I'm wondering, sorry, you were saying.
I was just gonna say, we're kind of talking about like the books and stuff and getting going, but building in public. One of the things is like just people talking about things and knowing that there's like other people out there doing this stuff. Like starting a company is hard. It's hard for all founders. It's really hard, right? Like there's a lot of up and downs. There's a lot, like especially early on. There's a lot of downs. Things that are challenging. You're like, hey, we tried this thing, it didn't work quite as well as we wanted. We tried this other thing, and you keep kind of going back and forth, and it can be a bit of a roller coaster. And one of the best resources, and this is pretty related to like building in public, has been like other founders. Just like I've yet to meet a founder of a company that is not just like stoked and willing to jump on a call with a different founder or co-founder and just like talk through things from either like giving perspective, giving advice, just being like an ear to listen to and commiserate, like, hey, I'm dealing with this problem, like, oh, I've been there before, like, yeah, it sucks, and just like working through those things, right? Or even celebrate, like, oh yeah, we hit this win, them being like, yes, like I know that feeling that you're having right now with that win, like let's go. That network of like founders out there, and just them all being willing to like jump on and help has been awesome. And it's like makes me and like I know Ben as well, really like motivated to do the same for other people.
Yeah, man, I fully agree with you, man. And for the people listening, and then they're not entrepreneurs right now, and you're kind of demotivating them by telling them it's really hard, and that's the truth, right? You don't want to lie. But it gets better and better. What advice would you give them? Like you mentioned the book. Any other resources you wanna share? Or
so I think for me, like the resources are really, I don't know, like you can go look up the books and read the different startup books. They're all kind of the same. Like everyone's gonna kind of point toward the same ones. But for me, it's like, what are the like resources around that stuff that are like really valuable that I've found the best? So we mentioned co-founders, right? Like reaching out to other founders of companies. The other one is, especially if you have some experience working in your industry where you're trying to launch a company, is just like your ex-coworkers and your colleagues in your network that you've built up over time, getting that early feedback from those folks and like tapping into that network of people has been like super valuable. And I'm always grateful when they jump on a call, but like they're always willing to, right? Like if you were like working with people for a while, they're like rooting for you. And to your point, like, just like knowing like, hey, this thing is challenging, but that's not a reason not to do it. Like lots of things are challenging. There's like, there's huge rewards to doing it. There's huge fulfillment and starting something, being able to like take your idea and like bring it to fruition. Hitting that network is really important. And if you go for funding and you take on funding, thinking about like who are the people that you want at your back, like what's their track record of the portfolio companies that they've invested in, but also like how have they treated the founders that they've invested in? How have they treated the companies? Like what are they there to like?
It's a two-way street.
Exactly. Are they there to like focus on the returns? Or are they there to really like support the founders and like help you get to the next stage? And like as you move to later and later stages of funding, it's always gonna focus more on like, hey, we're really focused on the return here. But like in the early days, like the pre-seeds and the seed rounds and the angel rounds of funding that you might take on early on, you want those folks that are like, hey, we're investing in you and we fully understand this risk and we're rooting for you and we're putting money into this because we believe in you as founders and we've got your back, and they're going to give you like, you know, they're all, not just the money, but really that they want to be part of this and assist you in that. We have that in all three of our investors. They're really good at that stuff. So we got lucky there. But yeah, I would say, like, you know, as you're looking for funding on something, like, if that's the route that you take, like, find the investors that are good for you, not just the ones that are willing to give you money.
Yeah, exactly. Because money is not everything. You need to make it work in terms of the long term relationship. Because, you know, a startup is as a long term relationship. And Chris, just like a segue from talking about working really hard and startups are super difficult. How do you keep that balance between work and personal life? How many hours do you work a day or a week? I'm kind of interested in that. And how do you keep the balance?
Yeah, so I personally think that this is a really underrated question, and it's a really important one. Because, like, you know, as founders, there's a lot of toil, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of hours, and the demand comes at all the time. But the way I always, first of all, you just have to like step back as a founder. I think it's worth stepping back and being honest with yourself. Like, you have to sleep. You do not maybe like need to get beauty rest every night, but like, you know, you have to sleep, you have to eat, you have to like take care of yourself. So like you gotta, like, you cannot work 24 hours a day. So like get that idea, you know, out of your head from the get go. Like, but you're gonna put in a lot of hours. But the way I approach it is really less about like these are the hours that I'm gonna work, and it's more about like what's the job that we need to get done and what's the right time frame to get that done on, and then focusing on what that's going to take, and really just like, for me, munging together the time with work and the time for my personal life. So I found this for my own, this is like true in a startup right now, and it's been true in like big and small companies, of just like munging it together. And probably part of it's like that kind of like I'm in a customer facing role. Like when the customers are having a hard time, like I got to show up and be there for them, right? And be helping them. So I kind of can't control when that is. So like when it's not happening, those are the good times for me to go like do some of the personal things and cut back. So like if I actually munch it together, then I end up having way more flexibility in terms of being able to be like, hey, I'm going to go do these things that I actually enjoy doing that help me like relax and cut away. So number of hours totally runs a gauntlet from, hey, I'm trying to take a little bit of a break, which is super important, right? So sometimes when you're up against a hard problem, the best thing you can do, like you've been at it for a while, just like step away. Just don't think about it for like whatever, few hours, overnight, couple of days, go on like whatever, you're going on vacation, like don't try and work the entire vacation. Take that time. When you come back, you just get a new perspective. Like, I don't know, like brains are weird like that. You just come back and like the answer just like lays out before you. And you're like, how does this seem so obvious now and I couldn't figure it out before?
Yeah, man, I agree with you. Like, I got my best ideas in the bathroom, honestly, on the way to the bathroom or in the bathroom. So it's weird how the brain works.
Yeah, and you have to, like, in order to have those, like, you have to step away from the thing just to, like, have that room to just think and process some stuff. So, you know, I think, like, Maynard actually gets into some of these things in some of his letters in his book. One of the letters is about being overwhelmed, and he kind of gets into it like, hey, slow down, calm down, come up with a plan. That's all related. But yeah, for like the work-life balance, I munch it together so that way I have flexibility. There's like times like I have a kid, so, you know, I have to get him up and get him on the bus in the morning. So there's some times where it's like, this time, like I have to do this. But then I really look at it and say, like, what are the things that are really important to me in my personal life? And I'm going to make sure that I have time for those. And I'm going to make sure that I'm hitting those. It's like once in a blue moon, like, okay, maybe I skip like a workout or something. So for me, it's exercise. I need to exercise a lot. I want to stay healthy, prioritizing time with family. I love skiing and going to see live music. So I need to like bake some of that stuff, time for that stuff in as well. And I don't want to get through like an entire winter and be like, well, I never had time to hit up the mountains. Like, that's one of the reasons I moved to Colorado, is to be by the mountains. So like, you know, capitalize on that. That doesn't mean I'm out there every single powder day and up on the mountains skiing every single day, but like find that time to do that stuff, because like getting that time away, like it just gives you that perspective, and you come back and you're just like refreshed and ready to go. There's like long studies on the importance of this stuff, where there's diminishing returns after a certain number of hours in a day, right? Like it could be, I forgot the exact number of hours, but after a certain number of hours, you aren't actually more productive. You're just like tired and burnt down. And it's like, if you take that break, get the rest, come back, you are far more productive at a rate that's like exponential compared to like the long tail of trying to squeeze every ounce of everything out of every hour and every minute of every day. And that's my own personal take. I know, I'm sure there's people out there that would disagree with that.
I agree a lot with what you say. I see myself a lot in the stuff you said, but just like out of curiosity, if this is how you kind of put the standard to yourself and your team of co-founders right now, what do you think about like when you're getting employees? Will you treat it the same way, or are you going to have a different perspective then?
So first, before I answer that, one thing that I saw you post recently, and I really liked it. And it was like, show up every day, and I think that's important, right? That's important both at work and in your personal life. Like, well, everything that you're doing, like show up every day and do it. Like show up every day for your family, show up every day for your work. And that doesn't mean, like, to me, the way I internalize that doesn't mean show up and you got to work X number of hours every single day. It's like, show up and do the stuff, like make sure you're getting it done, and really like focus on like what are those priorities in your life related to work and others and outside of work, and just make sure you're like showing up and getting them done. And I really like that approach. But yeah, back to the employee question. Yeah, absolutely. So we treat it this way. Our employees have lives, they have families. Most of us have kids. They need to go do those things, right? Like you need to take that time away. Our designer lives in New Zealand. He's from the US, from Memphis, I believe, lives in New Zealand. And he moved there right before the pandemic. He hadn't seen his parents in years. His parents were coming. It was like, wow. Like take the time off. Like they're there for like this week, like take the time off and go be with them. Like this is the thing, when you have employees, your employees can all go work somewhere else. Yeah. Right. Like they owe you nothing. And as leaders, if we can like internalize that and just say, hey, like, how do I get these people to show up? If you're a boss, like we kind of like keep everything flat, but like, just like in any company, right? If your boss is like, oh, you haven't seen your parents in years, like go spend time with them. Like, you're going to come back and be like, hell yeah, that was awesome. You're going to be so stoked to work for that person, like work harder than if they were like, well, maybe you need to like shave off some hours here. Like, I mean, I don't know, like if things are blowing up and like this is the most critical person to come in and fix it, maybe things are a little bit different, but like that should not be a daily occurrence, right? Like where everything in your infrastructure is blowing up, like get some stability. But when you treat people well, they're going to return it like tenfold back. And so that's always been, like, I've ran bigger teams throughout my career and stuff, and that's always been my approach.
That's the wise approach.
You know, I would tell some of my folks, they're like, I'm working kind of like doing some like camping stuff, but like I'm also working, not taking all the time off. It's like, what's going on today? It's like, oh, the kids are playing by the creek and we have a one-on-one schedule. It's like, go play with them. We can talk about this next week. Like if we don't have anything super critical to talk about, I don't need to suck up 30 minutes or an hour of your time. Like, go repurpose this for time with your kids. Employees are going to love that so much and they're going to come back.
Yeah, exactly, man. I fully agree with that. Just a question, how long are you going to work at Anchor before you exit? I mean, last companies, you were like 10 and 20 years. This one is your like little baby, I guess. How long will you be working there?
I don't know. We'll see. If you ask me how long I would say at any of those other companies, I mean, it was like 10 years at Heroku, but it was like 3 to 4 at previous companies. So a little bit longer than probably the like 2.5 to 2 year average of like in the tech world. But I had no idea I was going to stay at Heroku for as long as I did. So I don't know. Probably depends on like what kind of exit we end up having as a company. Like, do we ride this thing all the way to massive growth and eventually an IPO, or are we gonna, work on some kind of acquisition somewhere? That probably determines some level of the fate. But
and it's open source.
Ride this thing out.
Perfect,
yeah, the CLIs are open source. The core of the platform is currently not.
Okay, man, that's really cool. I wish you guys the best of luck. I really like your product. It's an amazing product, and I wish more people get to know it. And this is why we're actually doing this, is to bring awareness to this awesome product. And then to finish off, I want to just leave the word for you, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. Like always, it's been great talking to you.
Likewise, man. Cheers.